The reinforced door hissed open, and Jace's first thought was that intelligence had sent him to the wrong cell. The creature slumped against the far wall wasn't a beast. She was a woman with pale skin that caught the harsh overhead lights, copper and gold hair falling in tangled waves past bare shoulders. Delicate features, high cheekbones, full lips pressed tight. But her eyes stopped him cold, amber gold and huge, with vertical pupils that tracked his entrance with exhausted wariness. She wore remnants of dark combat armor, torn and scorched. Her hands rested on her thighs, tipped with retracted claws, and atop her head were large pointed ears covered in orange fur, pressed flat against her skull. The tail emerging from her spine was easily 6 feet of luxurious fur in shades of flame, wrapped protectively around her body. Jace had seen the briefing footage. Kitsara warriors moved like dancers. This woman looked like she was holding herself upright through sheer will, her breathing shallow, skin sheened with fever sweat. He closed the door and stayed near it, letting her assess him. Her ears twitched once toward his breathing, then flattened again. "I'm Captain Holden," he said quietly. "I'll be on watch tonight." Her eyes tracked him as he moved to the bench outside the energy barrier. She didn't speak, didn't move, except for the tremor in her shoulders she was trying to hide. Jace pulled up her medical file on his wrist display and felt something cold settle in his gut. 3 days in custody, 0 treatment, wounds left to fester. Status, non-priority hostile asset. He looked up and met her eyes. Her tail had tightened around her body, ears trembling. "You're burning up," Jace said. Her eyes lost focus for a moment, her head swaying, before she caught herself and forced her gaze back to him. Jace checked the corridor, empty. He returned to the barrier controls and scrolled through authorization protocols. The woman's ears lifted slightly, swiveling toward him with sudden alertness. Her voice emerged rough and low, shaped by an accent that turned consonants into something between a purr and a rasp. "Don't." He looked at her. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're considering, it will cost you." "Probably," Jace agreed and overrode the medical lockout. The barrier died. The woman tensed, ears shooting upright, tail bristling as she tried to push further into the corner. Jace grabbed his trauma kit and crossed slowly. "Easy," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." She laughed, bitter, the sound catching in her throat and turning into a cough that shook her frame. When it subsided, she was paler. "Then you're a fool." "Yeah, that's been mentioned." Jace knelt and opened the kit. "I need to see your shoulder." Her hand moved to cover the torn armor instinctively, claws extending. "Why?" "Because that wound is killing you, and I'd rather not watch someone die on my shift if I can prevent it." They stared at each other, her ears swiveled forward then back. Her tail remained bristled, but the tremor was worsening. "You think this changes anything," she said finally. "I think you're a person in pain and I have the means to help. That's all I'm thinking right now." Something flickered across her face before her expression closed. Slowly, her claws retracted. She lowered her hand. "Do what you will." Jace moved closer. Up close, he could see deep lacerations across her shoulder and ribs, edges inflamed and weeping, skin hot and mottled. The armor had been cut away, leaving her exposed. She turned her head away, jaw clenched. Her skin was impossibly soft beneath his calloused hands, warm, and he could feel the tension thrumming through her muscles. He cleaned the wounds gently, and her breathing hitched when the antiseptic bit, her claws digging into her own thigh. "Sorry," he murmured. Her ears flicked toward him. "I've had worse. Doesn't mean this doesn't hurt." She turned her head slightly. "You're strange." He finished cleaning and began sealing the wounds with surgical adhesive. When he injected the antibiotic, her hand shot out and caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly gentle despite the claws pressing his skin. He froze, meeting her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, and the words sounded like they cost her something. "You're welcome." She released him and sagged back against the wall, eyes already glazing with fever and exhaustion. Jace stayed, monitoring her vitals, watching her breathing deepen as the medication took hold. Hours passed. The base quieted into the hollow silence of deep night. Jace found himself talking to fill the space. Nothing important, just the sound of a human voice in the dark. He told her about dust storms on his colony, the red sand that seeped into everything. He told her about the terrible coffee in the mess hall and the stars visible through the narrow window above them. Her ears twitched toward his voice, even when her eyes were closed. Her breathing steadied, tremors easing. Sometime before dawn, she shifted in her sleep and leaned against him, her head coming to rest on his shoulder, her clawed hand settling on his forearm with claws carefully retracted. Her tail curled around them both, impossibly soft against his legs. Jace went very still, aware of the warmth of her body against his side, the tickle of her hair against his jaw, the gentle weight of her trust. He looked down at her face, relaxed in sleep, and saw what the briefing footage had missed. She wasn't a beast at all. She was just someone who had been fighting so long she'd forgotten how to rest. When she woke, her eyes snapped open, and she jerked back with a sharp intake of breath, ears shooting upright, tail bristling in alarm. She stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion, shame, and something that might have been fear before she locked it all away. "I didn't," she started, voice hoarse. "It's all right," Jace said quietly. "You needed sleep." She pulled her tail around herself protectively, ears still upright but trembling. "You should not have stayed." The door lock disengaged with a harsh electronic chime. Major Merrick stood in the entrance, his pale eyes moving from Jace to the woman and back, expression hardening. "Captain Holden," Merrick said, voice clipped and cold. "Step away from the asset." Jace rose slowly, positioning himself between Merrick and the woman without thinking. Behind him, he heard her breathing quicken, felt rather than saw her ears flatten completely. "Explain yourself," Merrick demanded. "Medical emergency. I stabilized the prisoner." By violating containment protocols and compromising security. Merrick's gaze moved past Jace to the woman. "The asset is being transferred to Research Division for intelligence extraction, effective immediately." The woman made no sound, but Jace felt the change in her, the raw panic that flashed through her eyes before she buried it, the way her tail wrapped around herself so tightly it trembled, the absolute stillness that came over her body. Merrick's eyes returned to Jace. "You're under review, Captain. Dismissed." Jace looked back at her once before he left. She met his gaze, her amber eyes unreadable, ears flat, entire body held in rigid control. But her tail gave her away, wrapped tight, fur standing on end, the tip twitching with barely suppressed terror. The door sealed between them with a hiss of finality, and Jace walked down the corridor with his hands clenched into fists, the warmth of her touch still lingering on his skin. Jace found Dr. Kwan in her lab at 200 hours, hunched over a microscope. She looked up, brown eyes settling into concern. "Captain Holden, you're supposed to be confined to quarters. I need to know what intelligence extraction means." Kwan glanced at the door, then gestured him closer. "Close that." When he turned back, she was pulling up files on her terminal. The screen filled with medical diagrams, dissection protocols, tissue sample requirements, clinical language describing procedures on a living subject without anesthesia. "They're going to vivisect her," he said flatly. "Merrick has classified her as non-sentient. Legally, she has the same rights as a lab rat." Kwan brought up another file, but look at this. Personnel file, Saraketh of the Ember Clan. Buried in the mission logs, a sealed incident report. "She refused a direct order," Kwan said quietly. "Deploy a biological weapon against a civilian settlement. New Providence colony, 4,000 people, mostly families. She destroyed the weapon cache instead. Her own people declared her traitor." Jace stared at surveillance images, children playing in a courtyard, farmers tending crops. "She saved them," he said. "And now we're going to dissect her for it." Kwan met his eyes. "I've been documenting ethical violations for months, but I can't stop this. You understand?" "Yeah, I understand." He made it back to the detention wing, using maintenance corridors and forged clearances. The night guard let him through. Sarah was awake, pacing with tight movements. Her tail lashed with agitation, ears swiveling toward him instantly. She stopped, facing him. "You came back," she said. "I needed to talk to you." "About my execution?" Her ears flattened. "I assume that's what intelligence extraction means." Jace crossed to the barrier. "It means vivisection." They're going to dissect you alive." Her ears pressed flat, tail wrapping around her leg, but her expression remained controlled. I expected nothing less. "Why did you refuse the order?" Her ears lifted, swiveling forward. "What?" "New Providence Colony biological weapon. You destroyed it instead of deploying it. Why?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about that?" "Does it matter?" Her tail lashed twice before settling. "My commander called it tactical necessity. I reviewed the coordinates and saw families, children, civilians with no military value. And I realized that if slaughtering them was strength, then strength had become something monstrous." Her ears drooped. "So I became a traitor instead." Jace deactivated the barrier and stepped through. "You're not a traitor. You're someone who refused to murder children. There's a difference." "Not to my people." Her tail curled protectively. "Not to yours, apparently." "To me, there is." He saw the exhaustion beneath her control, the weight of isolation she carried alone. "Tell me about your family." Her ears swiveled back in surprise. "Why?" "Because I want to know." Over the next 3 days, Jace returned whenever he could. They talked during his shifts, carefully at first, then with growing openness. Sarah told him about her younger sibling, Kale, killed in the early fighting. Her voice took on that purring quality when she spoke about teaching Kale to hunt in their homeworld forests. Jace told her about the colony he'd failed to evacuate, how he still heard the screams. Sarah's ears flattened with sympathy, and her tail reached out to brush his hand. "You can't save everyone," she said quietly. "Doesn't stop me from trying." She studied him, ears forward and relaxed. "You're going to get yourself killed with that attitude." "Probably." Her tail curled around his wrist, soft and warm. That would be unfortunate. On the 3rd night, Jace watched her pace, and something shifted in his chest. When she turned to look at him, ears perking forward with curiosity, he realized he was staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just thinking." "About?" "About how you're the most honest person I've met in years. Everyone I know performs, plays their role. You just tell the truth even when it costs you." Sarah's ears drooped, and she sat down across from him, tail sweeping to rest in her lap. "The truth cost me everything." "Then you didn't have much to begin with." She laughed, surprising them both. A soft sound, almost hesitant, and her ears perked up with something that might have been delight. "You're strange, Jace Holden." "You've mentioned that." The night before her transfer, Jace stared at the duty roster. Merrick had scheduled 4 guards. Research Division had prepared the operating theater. He thought about Sarah's face relaxed in sleep. Her tail curled around them both. The courage it took to destroy that weapon, knowing it would destroy her life. He thought about the colony he'd failed to save and the one she'd succeeded in saving. Jace pulled up the maintenance systems and constructed a lockdown scenario. Power failures, emergency protocols, chaos that would mask one human and one Kitsara slipping through infrastructure tunnels. When he entered her cell for the last time, Sarah sat against the wall, tail wrapped tight, ears flat. She looked up with resignation. "They're coming for me in 3 hours," she said. "I know." Jace deactivated the barrier and extended his hand. "We're leaving before they get here." She stared at his hand, her ears lifted, swiveling forward with shock. "What?" "We're leaving, right now. I've triggered a security alert that'll lock down most of the base. We'll have about 20 minutes to reach the maintenance tunnels." "You'll be executed for this." "Probably. They'll hunt us both. We'll have nowhere to go." "I know." Sarah's tail unwrapped, fur bristling. "Why would you sacrifice everything for someone like me?" Jace met her amber eyes and gave her the only answer that mattered. "Because it's wrong, and I can stop it." For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. Her claws retracted completely, grip warm and strong. Her tail swished once, tentative, almost hopeful. "Then we run," she said. Alarms screamed through the base as they slipped into the maintenance tunnels. Jace sealed the access hatch behind them and found Sarah pressed against the tunnel wall, ears swiveling to track boots pounding overhead, tail bristled and thrashing. He touched her shoulder gently. "Stay with me." She nodded, and they ran together into the darkness, fugitives now, hunted by two species and bound by a choice that defied every rule they'd been taught. Behind them, the base erupted into chaos. Ahead, the world waited with all its dangers. Sarah's hand found his in the dark, claws retracted, and that was enough. The buffer zone between human and Kitsara territory was a wasteland of broken rock and scrubland, baked during the day and frozen at night. Jace and Sarah traveled in darkness, navigating canyons and boulder fields while the heat leached from the ground beneath their feet. 3 days in, Sarah's wounds reopened during a rock slide. Jace caught her as she stumbled, felt the warm wetness spreading across her side, and pulled her into a shallow cave as dawn broke pink and cold across the horizon. "Let me see," he said. She sat with her back against stone, breathing carefully through her teeth. Her ears were pinned flat with pain, and her tail wrapped around her leg in a tight coil. When she peeled away the torn armor, the adhesive had split, edges of the wound weeping fresh blood. Jace worked by the light of a chemical glow stick, cleaning and resealing the lacerations with the last of his medical supplies. Sarah's claws dug into her own thigh, her jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. "Sorry," he murmured, fingers gentle despite the urgency. Her tail unwrapped from her leg and curled around his arm instead, gripping tight. The gesture was unconscious, desperate, and it made something in his chest tighten. "I've had worse," she said, voice strained. "I know, doesn't mean this doesn't hurt." When he finished, she sagged against the cave wall, her breathing shallow. Her tail remained wrapped around his arm, soft fur against his bare skin. "I've never had someone care for my wounds with gentleness," she said quietly. "Only efficiency. Get the soldier functional and send them back to the line." Jace settled beside her, careful not to jostle her injuries. "You're not a soldier to me." Her ears swiveled toward him, and she turned her head to look at him with those amber eyes. "Then what am I?" He met her gaze and told her the truth, someone worth protecting. They rested through the day, hidden in shadow while the sun burned overhead. Sarah slept with her head on his shoulder, and Jace kept watch, his weapon across his knees, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. When night fell, they moved again. The Kitsara patrol found them in a narrow canyon 2 days later. Jace saw the movement on the ridgeline first. 5 figures silhouetted against the stars, lean and deadly in their armor. Sarah's ears swiveled upward, catching sounds he couldn't hear, and her tail bristled. "Run," she said. They ran, boots pounding against stone, but the Kitsara were faster. Plasma fire lit the canyon walls in blue-white flashes, superheated air crackling past Jace's head. He returned fire, covering Sarah as she vaulted over a boulder, her tail streaming behind her. A voice called out from above, sharp and commanding, speaking in the Kitsara tongue. Sarah jerked to a halt, her ears flattening completely. "Sarah?" Jace moved beside her, weapon raised. She was staring up at the ridge where a tall figure stood, his silver-white hair catching starlight, his tail held in rigid military posture. "Tarek," she said, and her voice was hollow. The Kitsara warrior descended the canyon wall with impossible grace, his patrols spreading out to cut off escape routes. When he reached the canyon floor, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Sarah with contempt. "Coward," he said in accented human standard. "Traitor, you shame the Ember Clan with your weakness." Sarah's ears pressed so flat they vanished into her hair. Her tail lashed once, violent and agitated. "I refuse to be a weapon for genocide." "You refuse to be strong." Tarek's gaze flicked to Jace, dismissive. "And now you run with human vermin. How far you've fallen." Plasma fire erupted before Jace could respond. He dove left, returning fire, and saw Sarah launch herself at Tarek with a snarl that was purely predatory. They collided in a blur of claws and teeth, moving too fast for him to track clearly. One of the patrol moved on Jace's position. He put 2 rounds center mass, and the Kitsara went down. Another flanked right, plasma rifle tracking, and Jace felt the shot graze his shoulder. White-hot pain that made his vision blur. He kept firing. Sarah and Tarek broke apart, circling each other. Blood streaked her side where his claws had reopened her wounds. Tarek moved with brutal precision, and Sarah moved like fury given form, her tail lashing for balance as she ducked beneath his strike and drove her claws into his shoulder. Tarek roared and backhanded her across the face. She hit the ground hard, and Jace shot him twice in the chest plate, cracking the armor. Tarek staggered, and Sarah swept his legs, putting him down. The remaining patrol fled into the darkness. Sarah stood over Tarek, breathing hard, her ears flat, her tail bristled and thrashing. Tarek stared up at her, his expression twisted with disgust. "Finish it," he hissed. "Prove you still have that much honor." Sarah's claws extended, trembling. For a long moment she stood frozen, and Jace saw the war playing out behind her eyes, everything she'd been taught, everything she'd rejected, everything she'd lost. Then she retracted her claws and stepped back. "No, you're not worth it." She turned and walked away, her tail drooping, her shoulders shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and violence. Jace secured Tarek with restraints and followed. They found her sitting against a boulder, her face buried in her hands, her ears flat, her tail wrapped so tightly around herself she was trembling. Jace knelt beside her and she looked up, and there were tears tracking down her pale cheeks. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "Not Kitsara, not human, just someone caught between worlds who has lost everything." Jace reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face, his callous thumb brushing away tears. "Maybe losing what they told you to be means you get to choose what you become." Her ears lifted slightly, swiveling toward him. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, and when she opened them again there was something raw and unguarded in her gaze. Her hand came up to cover his, her claws gently tracing the line of his jaw. He covered her hand with his other one, and her tail slowly uncurled, reaching out to curl around his wrist. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me." The burn on his shoulder was worse than he'd thought. Sarah tended it with field medicine, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Her ears drooped with distress, and she kept glancing at his face as if checking that he was still conscious. "I'm fine," he said. "You were shot protecting me. Worth it." Her tail curled around his forearm, and she finished bandaging the wound in silence. They reached the relay station 2 days later, a derelict communications hub half buried in sand. Dr. Kwan was waiting inside, her expression grim. "Commander Voss sent me intelligence," she said, pulling up files on a portable terminal. "The conspiracy goes deeper than we thought. Hardline factions on both sides are engineering incidents to prevent peace talks. They're profiting from the war." She showed them the data. Weapons contracts, political donations, coordinated attacks designed to look like enemy aggression. "The bioweapons Sarah destroyed?" Kwan looked at Sarah, her eyes sad. "It was a false flag operation. They wanted the Kitsara to think humans had deployed it first, to justify retaliation and full-scale war. Your refusal disrupted years of planning." Sarah's ears flattened completely. They would have killed their own people. They would have killed thousands on both sides, still will, if we don't stop them. The window shattered inward, and Kwan jerked backward, red blooming across her chest. Jace grabbed her as she fell, his hands slick with blood, and Sarah lunged toward the window, returning fire at the sniper position on the ridge. "Merrick," Sarah snarled. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Jace dragged Kwan behind cover, but her eyes were already losing focus, her breath bubbling in her throat. "Stop them," she whispered. "Expose it. Don't let—" She died before she could finish. Sarah knelt beside them, her ears pressed flat, her tail wrapped around herself, and something broke in her expression, the last of her armor shattering under the weight of loss. She reached out and closed Kwan's eyes with gentle claws, her own eyes bright with tears. Jace held them both as plasma fire lit the walls around them, as Merrick's forces closed in, as the world burned. Sarah's tail curled around his waist, and he felt her grief like a physical weight, and knew they were running out of time. "We have to go," he said. Sarah grabbed the portable terminal, downloading Kwan's files. "Then we run, and we make this worth it." They fled into the wasteland as the relay station collapsed behind them, carrying the evidence that could end the war, hunted by everyone and trusted by no one. But they had each other, and the truth, and sometimes that had to be enough. They found shelter in a cave system deep in neutral territory, exhausted and grief-stricken. Jace built a small fire while Sarah sat against the far wall, her knees drawn up, her tail wrapped around herself like a shield. Her ears were flat, and she hadn't spoken since they'd fled the relay station. Jace sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Talk to me." "About what?" Her voice was hollow. "About how everyone who helps us dies. About how I've lost everything, my people, my purpose, my—" She stopped, her throat working. "I don't know how to process loss without shutting down. That's what we're taught. Bury it. Move forward. Don't feel." "You're feeling now." "I know." Her ears drooped further. "And I don't know what to do with it." Jace turned toward her, his hand finding hers where it rested on her knee. Her claws were extended, digging into her own leg, and he gently covered her hand with his. "You don't have to do anything with it. Just feel it. I'm here." Sarah's head turned toward him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "You keep saying things like that, like staying matters, like I matter." "You do matter." "Why?" The word came out broken. "I'm a traitor to my people, a weapon your people want to dissect. What am I worth?" Jace cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're worth everything. You refused to murder children when it would have been easier to obey. You chose right over survival. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing anyone can do." Tears spilled over, tracking down her pale skin, and her ears trembled. "I'm terrified I'm going to fail you, that you'll die because of me, like Dr. Kwan did." "You haven't failed anyone." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "You saved an entire colony. You saved me from becoming someone who could stand by and watch injustice happen. You made me believe that doing the right thing still matters." Sarah's breath hitched, and she closed the distance between them, pressing her forehead to his in a gesture he'd learned was profound trust in Kitsara culture. Her ears came forward, relaxed and open, and her tail slowly unwrapped from around herself to curl around his waist. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "Then don't." His hand slid into her copper hair, careful of her sensitive ears. "We face this together, whatever comes." She kissed him then, tentative at first, testing. Her lips were soft and warm, and when he responded, deepening the kiss, she made a sound low in her throat, that purring quality he'd only heard when she felt safe. Her claws retracted completely, and her hands found his shoulders, his neck, his face, touching him like she was memorizing the shape of him. They moved together in the firelight, learning each other with careful hands and whispered words. Jace's strength was tempered by tenderness, aware of her healing injuries, and Sarah's armor finally lowered completely. The soft fur of her ears was impossibly sensitive, and she shivered when he touched them, her tail curling tighter around him. Her claws traced patterns across his back, retracted and gentle, and her body curved against his with trust that felt sacred. Afterward, she lay against his chest, her tail wrapped around them both like a living blanket, her ears relaxed and content. Her fingers traced the scars across his ribs, and she pressed her lips to one, a burn mark, old and faded. "My people would call this weakness," she said quietly. Jace's hand stroked down the length of her tail, feeling the softness of her fur. "Then maybe weakness is just another word for being brave enough to let someone in." She lifted her head to look at him, and her amber eyes were clear. "I love you. I don't know when it happened, but I do." "I know, I love you too." Her ears perked up and a smile crossed her face, genuine and unguarded. "We're probably going to die tomorrow." "Probably. Then I'm glad I get to die having known this." She rested her head over his heart, having known you. They spent the night wrapped together, and when dawn came they were ready. The peace summit was held in a neutral facility, heavily guarded by both human and Kitsara forces. Jace and Sarah infiltrated through maintenance access, using codes Dr. Kwan had provided, moving through corridors with weapons ready and hearts pounding. The main floor was chaos, delegations arguing, security everywhere, tension thick enough to choke on. Jace spotted Merrick near the human contingent, his expression cold and controlled. Sarah's ears swiveled, tracking movement. "Tarek, 10 o'clock. The silver-haired warrior stood with the Kitsara delegation, his shoulder bandaged, his eyes scanning the crowd. When he saw them, his ears flattened with rage. Jace pulled out the portable terminal and moved toward the broadcast station. Security moved to intercept, and Sarah put herself between them and Jace, her tail lashing, her claws extended. "Get it done," she said. Jace worked fast, uploading Dr. Kwan's files to the open channels. Screens throughout the facility flickered, then filled with evidence: weapons contracts, coordinated attacks, falsified intelligence, the bioweapon plot, everything. The room erupted. Delegations turned on each other, shouting, demanding answers. Merrick's face went white, and he reached for his sidearm. Tarek launched himself at Sarah with a roar, and they collided in a blur of violence. Jace turned, weapon raised, but Sarah was already moving, ducking, striking, her training evident in every motion. She caught Tarek's arm, twisted, and threw him to the ground. "Enough!" Her voice carried across the room, amplified by the facility's speakers. "Look at the screens. Our leaders have been using us, sending us to die for profit while they manipulate both sides into perpetual war." Other Kitsara warriors moved forward, surrounding Tarek, their ears swiveling as they processed the evidence on the screens. One of them, an older female with graying fur on her ears, spoke in the Kitsara tongue, her voice sharp with authority. Sarah responded, her stance proud, her tail held high. She gestured to Jace, to the screens, to Tarek, her words flowing with conviction. When she finished, several of the Kitsara lowered their weapons. Merrick raised his sidearm and aimed at Jace. "You've destroyed everything." Sarah moved faster than thought, putting herself between them. The shot caught her in the shoulder, spinning her backward, and she hit the ground hard. "No!" Jace dropped beside her, his hands pressing against the wound as blood welled hot and fast. "Sarah, stay with me." Her ears were drooping, but her eyes found his face. Her tail tried to curl around his arm, weak but persistent. "Worth it," she whispered, her voice taking on that purring quality even now. "Finally, worth it." "Don't you dare." His vision blurred. "I'm not done learning how to make you laugh." Security swarmed Merrick, dragging him down. Medics rushed forward, and Jace held Sarah as they worked, his hand gripping hers, her claws curled gently around his fingers. She survived. 2 weeks later, they stood before the Joint Assembly, human and Kitsara representatives who had emerged from the political purge, ready to forge genuine peace. Sarah's shoulder was bandaged, her arm in a sling, but her ears were forward and alert, and her tail swished with quiet confidence. Jace took her hand openly, his fingers laced with hers, and felt her claws gently press against his skin, not restraining, just present, reminding him she was real, she was here, she was his. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Her ears swiveled toward him and she smiled. "With you, always." They walked forward together into the assembly hall, two people who had defied their species to prove that connection was stronger than hatred, that love could bridge any divide, that choosing each other was the bravest act of all. Behind them, the old world burned. Ahead, a new one waited, uncertain, dangerous, but theirs to build together. And that was enough.